Okay, greetings, people. We are taking it further now. We are looking at the parasites. We have two types, or we have two categories of parasites. We have internal parasites that we give them another name and say it's endoparasites. We also have external parasites that we give another name and say it's ectoparasites. So those are the two categories of parasites that we have, internal and external. So in this section that we are starting now, we will look at those parasites, but for now we will start by looking at internal parasites. It's very important for you to understand the differences between internal parasites and external parasites. When we talk about internal parasites, people, we say these are parasites that will affect the gastrointestinal of an animal. We say these are parasites that affect the gastrointestinal of an animal. So in a simpler way, these are parasites that will affect the alimentary canal of the animal. So they affect the intestines, they also affect the stomach. So we call those internal parasites. They can also affect even our lungs. They can also affect even the liver. We will look at which parasite affect the liver and which are those that affect the lungs, but we will look at that one masses bigger, the groups of internal parasites. Then we have external parasites, although I will not dwell more on them. External parasite, they are simple, they are external, and it so those are the parasites that will affect the skin. Sometimes they are attached to the skin of these animals. So that is the difference between the two. Internal, they affect the gastrointestinal tract, which is the alimentary canal. Then external, they affect the skin. So the external, they will have a negative impact on the production of wool when it comes into sheep. So it's very important to master that one. But in this case, people, our focus is on internal parasite. So the first thing that they will do, bazokunika isithombe, ne? It's whether bakunika isithombe se-parasite, noma bakunika isithombe, noma bakunika i-life cycle. Then i-question yokuqala abavama ukukubuza yona bathi classify the parasite, noma bathi categorize the parasite. Once they say classify the parasite or categorize the parasite, they want you to write the type of parasite. So in this case now, we have talked about two, and there are only two that we talk about here in this grade. So we have the internal and the external. When okufanele ukwenze lapho ufanele ubhale ukuthi ngabe yi-internal noma yi-external. So but I will then brief you with how do you identify what this is an internal and this is what an external. So we will look at that one. But if ever they give you in words, it will be easy for you. Once they say it affects the intestines, so the intestines are inside, then it so by internal. But if ever they say it affected the skin, it also suck the blood, just like ticks in Kazan. It also suck the blood. So legs will be external. Okay, fine. Let's talk about the internal parasites. This is what I want you to master here. The first thing, you must be able to define it. I've tried to give you the definition of it. Then, number two, you must be able to identify and describe main groups. So under internal, sinama internal parasite, then bese siba nama groups of internal parasite. So these groups of internal parasite, it's tapeworms, liver fluke, and roundworm. It's very important to be able to identify these main groups, because what they will do in your exam, as I've said, bazokunika isithombe, ne? Mabakunika lesithombe baqale bathi classify the parasite. When if they say classify the parasite, the first thing okufanele uyenze fanele usho ukuthi yini i-internal, because bafuna i-type lapho ukuthi internal and external. Then babe sebakubuya bathi write down the name. What is the name of the parasite? Sometimes they will say the name, or as they just say identify the parasite. In that case lapho bazoyese bafuna ukuthi usho ukuthi i-tapeworm, i-liver fluke noma yini i-roundworm. So that's what we will focus on masesiya deeper with this part. Then we must also talk about the life cycle of all these three parasites. You must also talk about the animal host, which animals do they affect. And again, here people, when we talk about this, la ngifuna ube able to tell ukuthi yipi enama host awu-2 esisiwabize ngama, we say those are indirect, they have an indirect life cycle, but we will look at it as we move along. Then we will look at the symptoms. How can we see that this animal is affected by this parasite? And la engizocela ukuthi siqaphele, ngifuna sibheke lama symptoms are applicable ku tapeworm, ku liver fluke na ku roundworm. Then sizama ukrema wona senzele ukuthi if ever bawubuza ama symptoms uyazi wena ukuthi khona symptom engena kuwo onke lawo 3, so uqala ngayo leyo. Then we also look at treatment. Same applies like treatment. First bheke lama treatment athi akabe applicable kuwo onke, but as for liver fluke ama treatments akhona azothi akabe different. Ngizokubonisa ukuthi are different ngayiphi indlela. Then we have the last 2. We must talk about the financial implications of internal parasites. Then we must also talk about the control measures or preventative measures. Gulawa out too, especially with financial implications. Remember, must call the chapter, guys. We look at ama diseases that affected the animal. When we look at the diseases, how do those diseases affect a production? And then we say, yes, if we say production will decrease, then what will happen to the economy of the farm, which is financial implication? So how can we solve that problem? How can we prevent it? Or how can we treat those diseases? So that's what we will look at. As for now, I will only focus on bullet number 1 and bullet number 2, definition of the parasite, of the internal parasite, and the main groups. But as for the definition, we've tried to look at it. Let's look at it. When we talk about internal parasite, we say these are parasites, ne? Or these are parasites that are commonly referred to as worms. As we see that we have roundworm, we have tapeworm. These are parasites that are commonly referred to as worms. Take note of this part. They live within or inside the bodies of animals, and those animals, we give them a name, ngama host. So they live inside, and they will live in the gastrointestinal. And we said gastrointestinal, they are talking about the alimentary canal, whereby they talk about the intestines. They also talk about what? The stomach. So we say these are parasites that affect the alimentary canal of what? Of the animal. So that's what we have to understand in this case. Let's look at the groups of these parasites. We have these 3 main groups of internal parasites. 1, we have tapeworms. 2, we have liver fluke. 3, we have roundworms. For this part, this is what I want you to understand. You must be able to identify it if bagnika it in a picture. You must be able to identify it. So meaning you must know the shape or the structure of a tapeworm, the structure of a liver fluke, and the structure of a roundworm. So please make sure that you understand this in that way. Let's start by looking at the tapeworm. Let's start by looking at the tapeworm. If you look at a tapeworm, people, a tapeworm, we say this is a cylindrical structure. And this is a cylindrical worm. And this cylindrical worm, if you look at it thoroughly, this cylindrical worm, it aibe nama segments. So in a simpler way, if I can try to do it, it is a worm way begane. It is a cylindrical worm. But this worm ebona ukuthi inama segments. It ayihlukahlukane phakathi nendawo. So we say this one, it is a tapeworm. So how do you see a tapeworm? Kuje ukuthi akube yi-worm, but bese ihlukana ngani ngama segments, as you can see here. This worm, this tapeworm, this is what I want to understand. This tapeworm, CSCT, it has an indirect life cycle. Why we say it has an indirect life cycle? We say a tapeworm has an indirect life cycle because inama host out2. If we say inama host out2, we simply mean that it requires 2 hosts to complete its life cycle. So now we have 3 information that we have. It's a tapeworm, okuyi-worm, bese iba nama segments itayi-divide, and then we say it has an indirect life cycle, meaning idinga how many hosts to complete its life cycle? 2 hosts. I hope now you are wondering, because we say it has an indirect life cycle, so it dinga how many hosts? 2 hosts. When we talk about this host, now you will find it will be a farm animal. If we would be a farm animal, in this case, another host, or which is an intermediate host, kuzoba yini ngama mites. We'll talk about this one masizigena kule cycle yonkana. So people, a tapeworm inama host out2, it could be the farm animal, and then kuphinde kube yini kube ngama mites. So ama mites hlobo sami siyesithi ama mites ayini angama inter, siyesibize kanjalo, we call it intermediate what? Intermediate host. So that's what is important for you to understand here. So we say tapeworm, it's a worm with segments, indirect life cycle, meaning inama host out2, i host eyodwa kuzoba yi farm animal, kubuye kube yini kube ngama mites. We're still gonna talk about ama mites later masisikhuluma ngani ngama external parasites. Then we have this one, the liver fluke. We call it a liver fluke, people. Liver fluke. This liver fluke, if we bega in terms of its structure, do you see that a liver fluke iti ayimiso okwani okwe leaf? And this liver fluke eti ayimiso okwe leaf, it needs a wet environment for it to survive. So it ayithanda indawo ezithi azibe wet. You will see as we move along ukuthi how do they replicate more, or they reproduce easily ku wet environment. So we say it's a liver fluke in terms of its shape. Yibona shape yakhona ukuthi itayimise okwe leaf if you see it. Then we say they like a wet environment. They use a wet environment in order to survive. Okay, fine. Why we sometimes call, why they like to give it this name? I used to say to my kids, the reason we give it a name and say it's a liver fluke, it's because it affects the liver of the animal. The eggs will get matured in the liver, and then it will move iya kuphi ku bile duct, then bese isuka ku bile duct ihambe iyongena kuphi ku alimentary canal, or as kuma small intestines. So we say it's a liver fluke because mostly it affects what? The liver. So that's how you have to identify it. Mayubheka wena liver fluke imiso okwani okwe leaf, because in this section that we're focusing on, I'm just focusing on identification of these parasites, of this internal parasite. Then the last one, the last one, we have a roundworm. If you look at a roundworm, if you can focus on a roundworm, you can see that a roundworm, it is a worm. They say it's a white worm. It is a worm. And this worm, this worm will affect the alimentary canal, and mostly it will also affect what? The lungs. So what we have to understand, the difference, if I can just talk about the difference between a roundworm and a tapeworm, and the tapeworm, is that i-tapeworm sithe yini kuye ukuthi akube i-worm again, kodwa yona bese iba nani, iba nama-segment. Kodwa masawubheka in i-roundworm kuye ukuthi nje akube i-worm, awekho ini ama-segment. Leke sihlobo sami yona iye ithi ayibe ne-host A1, and then sibe sesiye sithi in a direct life cycle, So that's the simplest part for you to understand in this case. What were we doing? Besibheka ini i-identification kuphela. We said sine tapeworm. I-tapeworm inani, inama-segments. Sathini, inama-host awu-2. It will be the farm animal host plus the mites. Sabuya sathi sine liver fluke. I-liver fluke imisokwani okwe-leaf. Ithanda indawo ezinjani, ezi-wet. And then there's something that I want to add here. I-liver fluke again in an indirect life cycle. If we say in an indirect life cycle, sisho ukuthi in a 2 hosts. It's ebe nama host awu-2. Lawo ma host awu-2 sihlobo sami kuzoba yini? Kuzoba maybe a farm animal. Iva muktana maybe a cow or else a livestock. And then sizobe sesiba ne intermediate host okuyini, okuyi-snail. Kube ne intermediate host okuyini, okuyi-snail. So we say the snail, it is an intermediate host. So that's what I wanted to clarify here before I move forward. Then bese siba ne roundworm, yona ibe worm kodwa ayinawo ini ama-segments. Let's summarize it here. We say it's an internal parasite. So wena ukufuna ukwenza, once bafike bathi classify, uzobhala ukuthi yini i-internal parasite. Kwesinye isikhathi ngeke bathi classify, bazothi categorize. Uzobhala kuthini wena, internal parasite. But then if now they ask you what is the name, they may say name or they may say identify the parasite. Mase bathi identify the parasite. So uyabuya wena uthi ngabe i-tapeworm, kungaba i-liver fluke, kungaba yini i-roundworm, depending ukuthi leyo question leyo bayiveze kanjani. I hope you master it here. Sometimes they will say, ngifuna ibambe kahle le